Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this session. I hope you've had a great conference so far. There have been a lot of fantastic speakers. I know I've really enjoyed it, and I'm really excited to present to you today. So let me just share my screen really fast, and we can get started. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about bridging the gap between in-house and agency SEO. I've worked in both sides of the spectrum, and I found that they kind of relate to each other in some kind of interesting ways and differ in others. And I wanted to give you some advice on how to best bridge that gap. So if you decide to move in either one of these directions, you know how to do so, and it won't be as much of a shock to you. And as you can see, this will be in the spirit of the season and is very much Nightmare Before Christmas themed, one of my absolute favorite movies in this world. So I hope you enjoy it. Prepare. This is I've told everyone this is Gift City, so you'll be seeing a lot of this crew right here. So, as I said, my name is Jesse McDonald. I am a global SEO strategist and optimization lead at IBM, along with a fantastic team of other folks that really do some amazing work. So, it's an honor to be a part of that team. I've served as a judge at the US Search Awards since 2018 and also the Global Marketing Awards this year. Been listed as one of the top 140 SEOs to follow by Search Engine Journal, a frequent contributor to Search Engine Journal, the SEM Rush blog, and Search Talk Live. And I'm also a co host of the Austin Otaku podcast with Keith Good, who you will be hearing from a bit later. Definitely check that out. It's a really fun podcast that dives deep into the actual hobbies and outside of work stuff of some familiar faces in the industry and this conference itself. So, with that, I do want to give a bit of a disclaimer before we move on. I am legally obligated to tell you that the thoughts and opinions that I share in this presentation are my own and do not reflect those of IBM. So, if I say something a little weird, don't tell IBM or I'll get fired. So, I'd like to maintain my job so I can continue having some awesome insights to present to you all in the future. So yeah, just with that out of the way, let's get started, shall we? So, what are some of the main differences between agency and in house SEO? One of the first things that I found when I made my shift from agency work, which is what I really started out at, I started as a local SEO specialist at an agency here in Austin, then moved into a role where I was working with more enterprise national e-commerce brands and then moved up into the global in-house entity that is IBM. So I've kind of run into a little bit of everything in my like 7-year career. So one of the biggest things that I found at the end of the day is actually scaling the work. That's really the biggest difference in in-house and agency SEO. It's the things that you consider, it's the things that you actually do and how you implement them. It's all the same. It's just how you consider them and how you prioritize them and how you get them done. So it's not necessarily a huge shift. It's more of a shift in mentality versus a shift in what you're actually doing. And instead of having this client centric model, you tend to have more of an executive model, someone that has employed you for your skills, but you work for them as opposed to the client that you work with. So that was kind of a mentality shift for me, understanding that every call that I'm on, I'm impressing the person that signs my check as opposed to the person that could leave my business that I'm working with. So I say that in a way to kind of get it into your head that it's at the end of the day, the executive is still the client. You just kind of have to marry the way that you approach things with them in a different way. And and the one thing that you can always kind of count on is that you will have the executive that always finds something new and shiny that they want to try. The client might be a little less inclined to understand what SEO is. In my experience, it's always been something, well, my cousin does this and they recommend that, as opposed to the client who more than likely they're a marketing executive and will kind of understand what's going on and hear things through the grapevine that they're going to bring to you and think is the greatest thing in the world, even though it might be an out of date tactic or something that you've tried and it's just not possible for what you do. So realistically, it's something that you kind of end up having to be aware of, whereas before it's not so much as it would be in an agency environment. And then agencies tend to work a little bit more fast paced. You tend to touch a bit more. I know from my experience when I worked at that first agency I mentioned, I was working within the servers all the time, looking at how to optimize those for performance. I was, even touching small things like email, talking to the designers, things like that. You very much were at the mercy of the client and your workload and trying to get things done. It's kind of that hustle culture almost, and that granted that depends on the agency you work in, but it's very much well, let's just go ahead and get this done. Whereas in-house things are much slower to implement. Everyone wants to have that mentality of, well, we needed to do this yesterday, and that's great, but it's everything tends to work in its own little grouping or department. So you have to work within their priority restrictions and make sure that they understand the importance of what you're trying to do so that then you can push your initiatives forward. So because of that, things tend to run slower, and that really depends on the organizational model that you fall within or how things are actually working. But from my experience and the experiences of people that I know that are in more of an in-house environment, the wheel of change turns slow. So it's something to be aware of when you are potentially moving into this type of environment. Or if you're leaving in-house, be prepared because things are going to start moving faster. Things are going to be demanded of you a little bit more. You're going to need to wear a bit of a different hat. And I don't mean to rag on executives too much, but you definitely end up working with them and are kind of at the mercy of their needs and their bosses. So one thing to also keep in mind is that executives want things delivered quickly, like I mentioned. Um, In-house tends to be a little bit more prone to fire drills on a different level. So at agency work, things could be a little bit more like, oh, server went down, we need to address that. Whereas in an in-house environment, unless you're working with the server team closely, more than likely they're on top of that and handling it. It's none of your business. But you can give them, recommendations for things that they need to improve. But a lot of times when those kind of shiny things that I mentioned previously pop up that get the executives really excited, they'll want to have implemented that yesterday. So they kind of end up being fire drills. So that's something that you should kind of consider as you're considering SEO within an in-house environment. And then one of the biggest changes that I have found in my year and a half, almost 2 years of being in an in-house environment is that external link building's a lot differently or a lot different than it was when I was in more of an agency environment working with smaller, 1,000 page or less sites. So, and this might be a little bit different because I'm working in an environment that is incredibly established. So within IBM, we don't really consider external link building. We give some recommendations to our PR team just so that they kind of can get the best out of their work. But past that, our team doesn't really consider, external link building at all. Uh, Due to the nature of our brand, those things kind of end up happening on their own. And it's more of a matter of making sure that our site is built to capitalize on that equity flow as best as possible. Now, that's caveated by the fact that not all in house positions are in giant global companies. If you're working in an in-house position of a larger site that isn't necessarily global or have this gigantic presence, then external link building might still be a thing, but it's not necessarily going to be your number one in most instances. You're going to be working more on the actual site itself and figuring out how to best prioritize getting your pages built out the best way possible to meet your needs in search engine results pages. So, like I was mentioning, when you're working with a larger, more established brand, your EAT foundation is already there. And for those that don't know, EAT stands for expertise, authority, trust. There's some brilliant minds in this industry that are kind of looking at EAT and how it affects a site. And from what we have found on our end, we're kind of there already. We have that portion. It's just a matter of getting those foundational elements correct to capitalize on it. So that's something that is really a benefit to what we do. So, for example, if we build out a new product page that's kind of brand centric, it's pretty much a guarantee that we're going to rank for it very quickly. And while we do still kind of internally give the, hey, if we build this out, we can expect to see results kind of in that 6 month period, but it tends to be a little bit faster because we do have the luck of having a brand attached to our name, something as big as IBM that helps drive forward anything that we're really working on. So we really work hard on getting those foundational elements together and making sure that our site is playing nice with itself because it is so massive. So like I was saying before, the big difference could be the scale of the site. When I was working in agencies, I was working on sites for the local agency, it was 10 to 100 pages at most. The e-commerce site, it was, a couple 100,000 pages. Now I'm working more in that 1 million to 8 million page in index sort of thing. And we have much more that's not even indexed. They're more of a kind of campaign play, but there's still something to consider. So just something to be aware of. That's what I'm talking about when I mean scale. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the considerations for a small site and a large site. One of the things that you really need to consider, no matter the size of your site, is a logical topical flow that helps build that authority within EAT that we talked about for the given topics that you're covering. You want to make sure that your site is being thought of as the authority in this topic, which will help you rank better. So here's an example of kind of a site architecture that I'm talking about. So you have your homepage that is centric around the main topic of what you do. It could be software, it could be, plumbing, whatever that main focus is that drives down into those main topics that then have supporting content to back up the topic that you're talking about. So that's what I'm talking about when I mean a logical topical flow, a site architecture, an information architecture even. And one of the ways that you really want to make sure that you're passing equity through your site and these pages are the internal links. You want to make sure that anything relevant is actually speaking to each other and connecting back and forth between each other. That way, any links that you gain from external sites is passing equity between pages, because that's really one of the big ways on top of your content and your page outline or your page hierarchy that really helps push those rankings forward. So you want to make sure that that is in place, and you're using actual logical, non-forced anchor text between those links to make sure that you're giving those signals to the search engines of what you're trying to rank for. What are the topics that you're establishing? And another way to do this is through your navigation and sub-navigation, like breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are an excellent way to denote the relationship between pages without having to change a URL. So let's say that you think, or you create a new topic that makes that this one page makes more sense to be in. Instead of changing that URL to nest it in that new directory topic or topic directory, you can just change up the breadcrumbs to show that relationship between the pages and not lose out on any pre-existing equity that you've built up on that page through time. Simultaneously, adding the schema markup to those breadcrumbs then helps Google understand them a bit more. And you also have the benefit of giving your users a secondary level of navigation to move into those higher level topics that you are working on. So it's kind of one of those things that works on both levels. It works for the users, it works for search engines. So it's best practice to do it. And here's just kind of a visual of how you kind of want to think about your site. It's almost like a champagne tower that's passing more champagne into itself. So in this analogy, the glasses are your pages, the tower itself is your site, and the champagne is your link equity flow. Page A is getting the most champagne, and it is passing that champagne onto the glasses beneath it so that they fill up and are recognized as valuable into this champagne tower. So just something to kind of help wrap your mind around the concept of a logical site architecture and topical flow. So taking the example that we showed previously on information architecture and creating logical topic silos, this is where you want to link between them. You want your supporting content to link between each other in logical ways. You don't want to force it. Forcing it is not a good idea. That's really how you'll move more into the direction of getting devalued within the SERPs, which you don't want. So you want to make sure that everything that you do, internal linking, external linking, is absolutely logical, but you want that equity to pass between your pages. So definitely look for those opportunities to show relationships between pages, even across topics. So not only, like I said, not only do internal links pass equity, but they act as a second layer of navigation for users, which it's a double win. So you really want to make sure that you get that right. Next, you want to master skills outside of SEO. SEO being the thing that you're going into either of these scenarios and being the expert in, that's not where it ends, especially at in-house. It's more than just being an SEO expert. You really need to master skills outside of that to prove value and be successful in your role. So sometimes you can't just rely on being the pumpkin king or queen. You really need to put on your best Sandy Claus outfit and fit into some different roles so that it's understood across the organization that you're working in that you are valuable. So always work to improve your presentation skills. How you speak is just as important when presenting as slides. Slides don't really mean anything if they aren't presented well. More than likely, they'll just leave people guessing or feeling like they wasted their time in meetings. Meetings, especially in-house, tend to be very, very much a big part of what you do. So you want to make sure that if you are going to be presenting or speaking to someone in a meeting, that they actually find it to be a valuable meeting, or else you're going to lose, kind of relationship points, which isn't good. You end up having to play a lot of relationship building in an in-house environment, where you're kind of in more of that agency role where you're taking clients. Your role is to keep the client happy, keep them moving forward and in a positive direction and building that relationship. The same goes in-house, but your clients are more of the people you work with, your coworkers, the people that you're trying to help improve the general performance of the site as a whole, and getting their buy-in so that if you need their assistance or if they need your assistance, you have a good working relationship and can make that happen. So make sure that you understand best practices. It's really crucial in an in-house environment to understand best practices and stay on top of how the industry is changing, because you're going to spend a lot of time answering questions. I know in my role, whenever something new comes out, it's pretty much a guarantee that the next couple of weeks I'm going to be talking about it pretty consistently on my calls. For example, when Bert came out not too long ago, myself and Keith, one of my coworkers, spent a lot of time analyzing and figuring out what Bert actually meant, looking up how other people were talking about it across the industry through industry blogs and journals and stuff, and making sure that we had a good understanding about it so that when inevitably, and it did happen, someone said, "Hey, I heard about Bert. What does that mean?" We could say, "Oh, we know about this. Basically, you're running into this new kind of component to the algorithm where Google's evaluating terms or content differently and understanding its actual semantic relationship to the content better, and knowing when you're just kind of filling the content with marketing jargon, so we can use that to say we need to improve our pages based on this knowledge." So it's a good idea to always stay on top of what's going on in the industry. And on top of spending time answering questions, you're also going to spend a lot of time educating people. So make sure that you're staying up to date on those changes so that you can use your skills and be thought of as this expert, if you will. I hate using the term expert because I believe we all are in a place where we know what we know and we're going to keep learning, but you kind of almost have to have this I'm an expert mentality. you understand the component of your job, so you should be able to speak to it as best you can. So then you have the buy-in from the people that you work with, that you know what's best and you should be looked to make those decisions, or at least collaborate and help make those decisions. And confidence is key. Every day of the week, confidence is key. If you go into a meeting and don't seem like you know what you're talking about, then people are going to be less likely to actually listen to you and take what you say. So make sure that you understand these elements and can speak to them in a confident way, so that you are looked at as the expert. I One of the biggest things that I would recommend doing is, if you don't know something, don't pretend like you do, unless you have somewhat of an idea and can kind of at least speak to it somewhat. But if it's completely out of your realm, don't be afraid to say, let me get back to you on that. Let me do some research, or let me connect you with someone who would know better than I do. Because it's better to admit that you don't know something instead of giving a wrong answer, because that realistically could bite you in the long run, and you don't want to do that. So let's talk a little bit more about presentations. I mentioned it a little bit ago, but I find that I end up giving a lot of presentations in my current role. So I want to make sure you are aware of how things are a little bit different in in-house when you present as opposed to a client. So, like I said, you kind of have to go into confidence no matter what, especially if you're talking to an executive who might be coming to you because something isn't necessarily performing the way it should. You want to be able to speak to that in a confident way, and really make sure that you have a good style. Everyone's a little bit different. There's some people on my team that are just excellent presenters, just confidence flowing through them, and then there are others who it's not their cup of tea, and that's okay. So make sure that if you are in a place that you are presenting, that you are confident and that you can speak to it and feel comfortable doing so. um, Reviewing just standard SEO dashboards, I found in an in-house role, doesn't cut it. More than likely, a executive is going to have access to those dashboards anyway, so they're going to have seen it. So you're not really showing them anything revolutionary. You're really going to want to make sure that you understand exactly what that executive is going to want, so you can cater it to them. Standard SEO metrics tend to leave the executives scratching their heads a little bit. You can, say, oh, we're ranking this well, we're bringing in this much traffic, and that's great because those are pretty much your standard SEO metrics. But if you're not kind of correlating it back to, let's say, possibly revenue, or um, at least driving traffic to revenue driving products, then they're just going to wonder why they wasted their time talking to you about it. So you want to make sure that you are being clear and catering to what they want to see, and giving them something actionable. So yeah, like I said, understand what your audience wants to see, get to know them a little bit. If you can sit in on other presentations that go well, at least by other teams, I've definitely found that our seeing how our paid team or some of our business units even present to executives has been incredibly helpful for me. So try to sit in on how those executives are presented to, and understand if it goes well or not, and then adapt and use those techniques to your advantage. And like I said, make sure that you have absolute clear action items. Don't leave a presentation with an executive giving them the opportunity to not understand what you're trying to get at, not understand how to move forward. Don't let them have that "what does it mean" mentality at the end, because that's just going to hurt you. You want them to understand exactly what you're trying to get at and how you're moving forward from there. Because, like I said, if you get folks excited about items outside of your control, that's not going to be good. So you don't want them guessing on those things, and you want to make sure that you're only speaking to the items that you yourself are in control of and that you can action on. Because if not, you're going to find yourself in a bunch of trouble, and it's not going to work out well for you, and you're going to end up wearing a hat that doesn't necessarily fit you. Because, reminder, executives are always going to find something new and shiny that they want to try. So make sure they at least know what you are capable of and what your team is capable of, so that when they find that shiny new thing, they can at least come to you with something that you can do. So, some takeaways from this: remember, scalability is key. You want to make sure that anything you're doing is scalable. Don't put yourself in a position where you're having to do tons of research on tons of pages all the time. Make sure that it's coming in at least in a way that's scalable, or that you have a solution that is scalable. Automation is a great way to solve for this. Anything that you can automate and kind of put you in a position to where you action on it and just present on it, that is a great place to be, and something that I definitely strive for all the time. Cater your performance presentations to your audience. Know who you're talking to, know what they want to see, because if you don't, you'll just end up wasting time, and that's never a good thing. Make sure that you set your expectations correctly so that you don't leave yourself in a big hole. Know what you can do and what you can't do, and if you can't do it, know who can do it so that you make sure that you can at least point someone in the right direction, and then work on those skills outside of SEO to continue to prove yourself a valuable asset. Even though you don't work on it, it might not be a bad idea to at least know how it operates so you can at least speak to it, push someone over to it, or possibly take it on in the future if it's something you're interested in. So, with that, remember, become a valuable asset to your organization. Let your executives feel like you are in a good place and that you are truly meant to be. And with that, thank you so much. This is my 6 month old daughter in her precious Jack Skellington onesie. We're a big Halloween family. My wife and I got married on Halloween, so I wanted to make sure I used the opportunity to highlight that beautiful smile as best I could. If you want to know more about me, continue the conversation, or even see more pictures of her, because who wouldn't, please feel free to follow me on all social media platforms at Jesse SEO Geek. Thank you so much.